Well, I'm very honored to be here presiding, as it were, over this session and introducing Alice von Hildebrand. I was telling her when I was married 56 years ago, her husband's theology was the cutting edge of the theology of marriage. And I've profited by it all my married life. I had the feeling that it was sort of put on the back burner at the Second Vatican Council when they had so many other important issues to deal with. And then somehow when the theology of marriage got revived with John Paul's theology of the body, I felt that the metaphysical contribution of Dietrich von Hildebrand was kind of missing from the mix. And I know Alice von Hildebrand, besides being a prolific writer and teacher in her own right, has done much to continue and bring out of Lydian the work of her husband, and I'm very honored to be here presenting her.
Thank you, Professor. Well, I'm honored to be invited to talk at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm going to dedicate this talk to Mary, who is the mother of our Savior, who carried him in her womb for 9 months, and therefore he said to himself, of himself, I am the life. Mary is the mother of life. So my talk is particularly dedicated to Mary as mother of life. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. At my age, certain very interesting things happen. And one of them is you look back on your life and you realize your tremendous indebtedness to some people. And I might surprise you by saying that the first very important moment in my life was when I was 11 or 12. And French is my mother tongue, and I took a course on Pascal. For me, it was an extremely important moment in my life. For the first time I discovered that I had a profound philosophical interest. I started to read Pascal's thoughts, memorize them, but I'm going to concentrate right now just on one of them. Pascal says, man is the most baffling object in nature. Most surprising, most baffling. Now, at the end of my life, I can say to you, he is right. We have an incredible difficulty relating to ourselves, and we have a tremendous difficulty relating to others. Now, the object of my talk is trying to say, can this be healed? Why are we so baffling? You know, it seems to me it's so simple to be a chimpanzee. You jump from tree to tree, and you eat, and you sleep, and you reproduce yourself, and you die. That's all there is to it. And must say I envy angels. You're an angel, and you spend your time adoring God and saying, Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus. Then all of a sudden I discovered that I'm a human being, and a woman to boot. We are made up of body and soul. Problem number one. And this is something that I'm going to spend some time on, because it's an unbelievably difficult problem. Many people are going to say it is in fact the most difficult philosophical problems to solve. And we're going to offer plenty of wrong solutions, because it's much easier to fall into error than to find truth, because there are so many errors. You have unlimited possibilities, and there's only one truth. Moreover, you read Genesis, which I've read from the time I was 5, and every single time I discover something new. Male and female, he made them. Now, English is a beautiful language, but it is not a good philosophical language. It is a superb poetic language, but when it comes to philosophy, there are many words in English that are plainly missing, which creates for people enormous problems when they translate, let us say, from the German into English. You take man. In English it refers to a human being, and it refers to the male. Whereas in Latin you have homo. God made homo, male and female. And then there's therefore the difference between the man and the woman. But when you say man, homo, it means both of them. In other words, I'm going to defend the thesis that in order to understand who man is, you've got to understand that there's a bond between male and female which is so crucial, so essential, that the plenitude of human nature will never be realized when there is a tension, there is a divorce between one and woman, which is, to my mind, the curse of our society. We hear about nothing but divorce, about all sorts of things which I prefer not to name, and simply say we have a very, very serious problem. And I'm so convinced that unless we find some sort of solution and re-establish the greatness and the dignity of the family, of marriage, of maternity, of the relationship between man and woman, we might be very rich, but we are heading for disaster. I know enough about history to know that all the greatest catastrophes, the most powerful governments and states collapsed, not because they didn't have money, but because they fell into moral degeneration. And that is a big problem that we have. We are very complex beings. And when I look back on my life, I must confess that at times I say to myself, I have no idea why I did so and so. I cannot possibly understand why I omitted to do so and so. Because you just have to stand in front of God, go on your knees and say, well, I'm a very weak and very imperfect being, and the whole question of becoming a saint is to become unified. We are not unified, we are split beings. And it is quite amazing that one of my great philosophical loves, called Plato, says that one of the main aims of education is the unification in the good. This is a superb, incredible insight. We are not unified, we are split. And I mean, unless we mean that reunification, we have a tremendous problem. Now, the problem of the relationship between body and soul can be called the most difficult of all philosophical problems. You know, as a matter of fact, much as you think about it and write about it, you're never going to say the final words. Now, of course, when you have a problem, some people are too impatient to work on it with humility and patience. They want to find an easy solution. And of course, there are very easy solutions to the relationship existing between body and soul. I'm going to give you one, I'm going to give you two, as a matter of fact. The first one is, of course, to be found from Germans, because Germans are very philosophically minded, and they love complexity. And sometimes they love complexity so much that they oversimplify things to an amazing extent. His name was Moleschott. If you haven't heard about him, I forgive you, because he's certainly not a great thinker. But he wrote something that made him famous. To become famous, you don't have to say something which is true. You have to find an error that has never been formulated before. I mean, I just give you a key to success. According to Moleschott, the relationship existing between body and soul, between brain and mind, I'm quoting, is an identical relationship which exists between the kidneys and the urine. It's not a poetic comparison, but it takes it very seriously. In other words, the urine is to the kidneys what thought is to the brain. Now you have an easy solution. The question is it true? You know, now once again, suppose that I turn to common sense and simply say, as far as I know, urine has color and smell and weight, and it's wet. Now, try to give me characteristics. What is the weight of thought? What is its length? What is its color? It's nonsense. And my dear Chesterton, who has the unbelievable capacity of refuting nonsense, which humor says, you know, the materialist, you know, everything is material, analyze the easy part. They completely forget the difficult part and go home to their tea. The problem is solved. No, human beings have an uncanny capacity to go from one error to another one, which seems to be antagonical. All right. After molecules comes Hegel. You know, Hegel is going to say, Molecules says everything is matter. No, everything is thought. Being is thought, and thought is being. So, I mean, in other words, it simply tells us that all that exists is thought. And then Kierkegaard was witty as Chesterton says, you know, he truly feels that Mrs. Hegel was in a very uncomfortable position, because to be a thought in your husband's mind is to have a very sort of strange marriage. At any rate, you see, some people say everything is matter, and other people say everything is mind. One of these days, if God keeps me alive, I'm going to write an essay on the uncanny gift that people have to go from one mistake to an opposite mistake, which in fact is very close to it. We always believe that mistakes, you know, errors, are opposites. In fact, they're not. They're basically very, very close. For example, I claim that it is extremely simple to go from atheism to pantheism. You know, we know that modern atheists were making the headlines, you know, don't like the idea that there's a God. I mean, after all, if there's a God, I mean, who are you? You happen to discover that you're very little and very unimportant. So they reject the idea of God. But then all of a sudden you find another solution, which is ideal. Everything is God, pantheism. So I claim that to go from atheism to pantheism is an extremely easy step. Having taught my whole life for Massins in a secular university, I made all sorts of strange experiences. I had, you know, New York is a melting pot, and you have students from every possible nationality, and one of them was Indian. And one day she raised her hand and told me that she was God. Now, this places the professor in an extremely uncomfortable situation. Because to teach God is not a very pleasant position. I did my best and I came out of it, but I mean, thank God it was not repeated. No, I claim, you know, you say atheism and pantheism, nobody, there is no God, or everybody is God. That wins. It's extremely easy to go. Let me give you another example. Skepticism. In other words, you know with absolute certainty that you cannot be certain about anything. You know, that is skepticism. I'm absolutely certain, it is absolutely true that there is no truth. But you'll be very surprised how easy it is to go from skepticism to rationalism. You need to say human reason is so powerful, it can answer all questions. My husband said something which is very, very important. It's a great mistake to believe that truth is between two errors. It is above error. It's not a question of a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It is above it. Let me give you another example. Individualism, and then afterwards collectivism. If you study history, you're going to see that we oscillate between individualism and no sense for community, and then you turn to collectivism. The bad news that I have to give you is that it seems to me that we are moving fast towards collectivism, which is basically to give all power to the state and to deprive individuals of their own individual freedom. The same applies in ethics. You know, one of the great contributions my husband made in his ethics is to say Aristotle is wrong in saying that virtue is a mean between two extremes. I mean, you have avariciousness, and then you have prodigality, and then you're in the center, and then you have the right mesotes. No. Avariciousness and prodigality have the same motivation. Some people are avaricious because they like to sit on their gold. Some people are prodigal because they love spending it, but they have the same motivation. Generosity implies transcendence. It's above them. Now, the question of body and soul is so complex because up to original sin, there was harmony between the body and the soul. God created first of all the body and then blew a soul into it. Man is made to God's image and likeness, and man became a person. One of the key ideas in my husband's metaphysics is that the first metaphysical abyss is between creator and creature. That's an abyss that we cannot traverse. The second essential metaphysical difference is between personal and not personal. And then you have God, angels, and human beings, and then all non-personal beings on the other side. Now, in other words, we have a body, but this body is a body of a person. It's not an animal body. It is a body that has been elevated by its union with the soul. And this is something which is of tremendous importance. Once again, we can challenge the definition of Aristotle. Man is a rational animal. He's basically an animal who happens to have reason. I think that the proper view of man is that he's a person incarnated in a body. Now, if my body is the body of a person, please listen carefully. Every single organ of the body differs from a purely animal body, totally indifferently. This is so powerfully expressed when you get the extreme unction, the sacrament of the dying, in that you are anointed on your feet, on your hands, on your mouth, on your nose, on your and so on and so on. I mean, has my nose committed sins? I mean, after all, the nose is just a nose. Yes. Because the very moment that you're a person, every single part of your body must be personified, meaning to say elevated to a totally different level. Now, this was God's plan, and then came original sin. And you know, original sin is the one great disaster that we suffer from and are going to suffer from to the very end of the world. That is to say, all of a sudden, because of man's revolt against God, the body revolted against the soul. You know, the body was subordinated to the body and did not resent its being personalized, its being elevated, you know, which is going to be shown particularly in the intimate sphere. You know, the elevation that takes place through the fact that it is a body of a human being, of a person. From this moment on, man revolts against God, and the body revolts against the soul. Now, let us go back to original sin, to Genesis. You will notice that God said to Adam and Eve, you may not eat of the fruit of this tree. They did not challenge. They did not say to him, why not, for goodness sake? It looks so good. They accepted it. Then comes the serpent. And the serpent is infinitely more intelligent than we are, because, I mean, look, one thing is absolutely certain. We have intelligence, but a very limited one. You know, one of the things that I heard many times, I say many times, is God has set limits to human intelligence, but none to his stupidity. Well, it's often, you know, when you read history, you find out, I mean, the capacity to invent new errors is remarkable. The serpent comes in and says to Eve, why can't you eat of the fruit of that tree? She did not raise the question before. And all of us says, yes, indeed, why? Now, let me tell you something which I discovered in my old age. You know, obviously you can see we are free to raise questions. I mean, after all, we are free beings and we are entitled to raise questions, whatever crosses our minds. Please keep something in mind, that there are questions you will never raise unless you are in the wrong metaphysical position. And the curse of our society today is that we keep raising questions that should not be raised, because they show that we've already adopted a wrong metaphysical position. I'm not going to go into great details, but I know that you're clever enough to realize that we keep raising questions, why not? Now, can you imagine Saint Teresa of Avila, one of my great loves, saying, after all, I'm Teresa of Avila, I'm a great mystic, I've had amazing experiences, why can't I become a priest? I assure you, it never crossed her mind, for the plain reason that she was in the right metaphysical position. Now, this is something which is important. Let us try to see now the drama which has taken place because the body revolts against the soul. One thing is certain. One of the most powerful attractions for all of us is pleasure. And an impertinent Englishman of the name of Jeremiah Bentham bases his whole ethics on the idea that there are only two things that matter, pleasure and pain. And if you're intelligent, you should get as much pleasure as possible and as little pain as possible. And that's all there is to it. That he dares call it ethics makes me doubt of his sanity, because he has absolutely nothing to do with ethics, even though the question of pleasure is a very crucial one. Now, you take pleasure. Now I speak of physical pleasure, the pleasure experienced by the body. I'm going to make a distinction between three types of pleasure. The legitimate pleasures. It is legitimate that when you eat a good meal or drink a delicious, wine, and so on. This is pleasurable. It is pleasant. Now, in earthly paradise, there's absolutely no doubt that Adam and Eve enjoyed pleasures. But they saw them as gifts, and thank God for it. The very moment that man revolts against God and the body revolts against the soul, all of a sudden we allow our cravings and desires to take over. And the legitimate pleasures that are abused, overeating, getting drunk, and the rest of it. Now, in this very moment, they're evil because they're abused, and this gift is interpreted as right. And then comes something that I'm just going to mention briefly. They are perverse pleasures. That is to say, things which are intrinsically evil, wicked, filthy. And unfortunately, in our society, they become more and more acceptable because, after all, we have a right to freedom and we have a right to have fun. All right. Enough about the relationship between body and soul. We have a problem, and I'm absolutely convinced at the very end of my life that unless there is harmony between my body and my soul, peace, harmony between them, in other words, that I'm not the victim of addictions, and there are millions of us that are victims of addiction to alcohol, to smoking, and the rest of it. The list is long, and I don't need to give it to you because you know it as well as I do. We are addicted. We are not free. And one of the worst addictions is, of course, to the intimate sphere. That some people have no control whatever over the instinct. Let me go back to my beloved Plato. He mentions that one of the aims of education is to be unified in the good. I'm going to add something else. One of the main aims of education is to teach a child to achieve victory over pleasure. This was written 2,500 years ago. The victory over pleasure. Now, in our society, as far as I know, this is something that is totally forgotten. Teach a child to achieve victory over pleasure, because very soon pleasure takes over and you become a slave. And many of us are slaves. Now, victory over pleasure. Because otherwise, all of a sudden, you find out that your instincts and your cravings are so powerful that you cannot control them. Reread Book 8 of St. Augustine's Confessions. One of the greatest, if not the greatest, doctor of the Church. And in the Confessions, he tells us he had come to the point of rejecting Manichaeism. He was convinced that the Catholic Church was the one true church, but he was hooked on sex. And he discovers, he tells us very plainly, I could not overcome it. This great noble personality, he was a slave. And thank God, the answer was humility, prayer, and accepting grace. And then he achieved such a complete victory that he chose a life of celibacy. Now, this about body and soul. Comes something which is as important, is not more important. Relationship between man and woman. What I call a divine invention, because you can say what you please, but you've got to be a God to invent beings that are as complex as we are, body and soul, and man and woman. And we have to establish harmony between body and soul and between man and woman. And we have not succeeded because our society is plagued, because we don't know how to relate to our body and we don't need to relate to the other sex. Once again, let us go back to Genesis, a passage that I love particularly. Adam it's not good for man to be alone. And he looks at all the animals, and even the most handsome chimpanzee was not satisfactory. And then God creates Eve, puts him in a profound sleep, and there is Eve. And he said, blood of my blood and flesh of my flesh. He's enchanted, which is a proper response of a man, discovering the beauty of femininity. That is his response. Now I'm a woman, and I'm going to improve upon Moses, which is a little bit impertinent. Moses does not tell us what is the response of Eve when she saw Adam. But I know it, because I've been blessed in my life by meeting men, males, truly worthy to be called human beings. Starting with my beloved father, to whom my indebtedness is immense. Starting with my husband, remarkable priest, and some very beautiful male friendships that I've had and I'm having. I know that the response of a woman is admiration, a certain awe for the nobility of man, for his greatness, for his courage, for his objectivity. She truly knows that she needs him, that he complements her, that without him there's something which is going to be terribly missing. This is a magnificent plan that God invented. The enchantment of Adam over Eve, and the awe, the gratitude, which I feel every single time I meet a male worthy of this name, comes original sin. Disaster. The first thing that happens is that when God says, when did you eat of the fruit of this tree? She says, the serpent tempted me. The sickness of modern psychology, tua culpa. She doesn't say for one moment, I'm guilty. She doesn't say, forgive me. She says, the serpent is guilty. Much worse. He turns to Adam, when you did, he says, well, the one that you've given me. So, I mean, can you imagine such a pitiful personality? I recall I was 5 years old, and I heard this for the first time, and I was horrified. I detested Adam. I said, my dad would never do that to my mother because he's a gentleman. He's putting all the blame on Eve. It is someone else's fault. And believe me, in our society, the confiteor, mea culpa is replaced by tua culpa. My genes, my parents, my society, and this and so on. All criminals always say, well, I've had an unhappy youth. Well, many people have unhappy youth and become saints. In other words, they have absolutely no limits to what can happen if you confide in God's grace. Now, from this moment on, the tragedy began. All the beautiful male characteristics were destroyed. Strength replaced by brutality. I heard on French television just a few months ago that in France, every third day, a girl is assassinated by her boyfriend. No, these are reported. The brutality that men can have towards women is outrageous because they're physically more powerful and stronger than we are. You take this generosity, this feeling of protecting. all these characteristics degenerate into the caricature. And I'm sorry to say, the same thing was true of Eve. You know, her sensitivity, her delicacy, her, capacity to feel herself into self-centeredness and sentimentality and so on and so on. And today you realize more and more and more that men look down on women as being or wicked or mean or inferior or stupid, whatever it might be, and then women take the revenge, you can have women talking about men in ways that are not very flattering, I tell you. But very often you say to yourself, don't you have a responsibility? Because women have such a power over men that if they misuse it, well, obviously disaster is going to take place. This is a situation that we are facing today. How many women have a child out of wedlock? Read the statistics, and they are so depressing that I'm not going to mention them. How many marriages break up? How many people come to the conclusion it's not worth marrying because it's not going to last anyway? And it's, divorce is expensive. So it's much better to cohabit at the very moment you have a disagreement, goodbye. This is the situation that we are facing today. And it is a very depressing situation because I said these are to my mind the signs of disaster, political disaster. Now we talk about economics, we talk about politics, we talk about all sorts of problems, about the world getting too warm, and whatever it might be. All this is nonsense compared to the one problem is the reconciliation between man and God and the reconciliation between woman and man. Now comes my problem. Can this take place? Is it possible? Because, as I said, when a body is very sick, it is very difficult to find a solution. And I claim that there is a solution. The solution is offered to us, but we have to accept it on our knees. And now I'm going to turn to the greatest event in human history, the Incarnation. A young virgin, a young Jewish virgin, is visited by an angel who offers her to become the mother of the Savior. And she's surprised. She's amazed. And simultaneously, having dedicated her virginity to God, she doesn't see how this is possible and says, how can this be? I know not man. Now today, the very same words are used in such a vulgar language that you already understand that we live the very moment that we lose reverence, that Plato considers the most important virtue. We are lost. I'm going to translate the same thing. How can this be? I know not man. I'm very likely that people are going, are you kidding me? I haven't had sex. Now, there's one thing that I would like to draw to your attention. The words that you use betray your attitude towards the object that you're referring to. And the intimate sphere, I purposely say intimate sphere because when you say sex, this is something that animals have too. But when you speak of intimacy, this is something which is typical of persons. Now, it is absolutely amazing in the world in which we live, the crudeness of the language which is used by some well-meaning people to simply show that sex is something which is very healthy and very noble. I know not man. No, by saying I know not man, she's giving an amazingly important message. The very moment that you give yourself to another person, you reveal yourself. And this is only possible when you reach this type of intimacy. I knew my husband infinitely better than anybody else. And he knew me infinitely better than anybody else. we knew each other, which means to say you unveil yourself. Your relationship, I meet you for the first time, and I say, nice to meet you, and so on, and so I greet you. And then there are degrees of closeness that develop in friendship. And the more you know someone, the closer you get to him, the more you unveil yourself. You tell about your youth, or you think about your suffering, and you know. But I mean, I'm not going to meet you for the first time and tell you the most dramatic moments experienced in my life, because I would feel that it is something which is absolutely improper. You reveal yourself. Now, this leads me to the crux of my talk. There's some very, very important difference between men and women. They are complementary. They are not identical. And they need one another in order to complete themselves. I'm not referring only to physical differences. They're fairly obvious. And one obvious difference is that the male organs are visible. They're exterior. And the female organs are hidden. When you say hidden, you usually refer to something which is mysterious. You know, in other words, you hide what is mysterious. And I claim that in order to understand the beauty of femininity, you have to understand the mystery of veiling. You know, it is not by accident that up to Vatican II, which, as you know, created some sort of tsunami and terrible conflicts in the church, that all of a sudden, very, very, let us say, limited women suddenly discovered that to wear a veil in church was a sign of inferiority. I've never heard something stupid in my life, and I've heard plenty of stupid things. It's not, you know, when you spend your life in the academia, it is an ideal place to hear stupidities. If you go to the AMP and podium, I mean, it is also sound. I mean, 2 plus 2, and then all of a sudden you go there, and you find out, I'm quoting, that when you enter Hunter College and speak of Catholic girls, by the time they left, 65% of them had lost their faith because he had been made ridicule. Ridicule kills. That's it's a French word. The moment you ridicule something, what? The Roman Catholics still stuck in the Middle Ages. You know, we are the age of the Enlightenment. No, you see, the problem is that you can be blinded by light and you can be blinded by darkness. And I claim that the Middle Ages that has produced Dante, Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventure, and all these giants, and Giotto, you know, if you say that these are dark ages, it simply means you've been blinded by light. And then you come to the 18th century, the age of the Enlightenment. You know, my interpretation of the Enlightenment is that you're a dark, dark den, and then someone lights a small little candle, and then people call it enlightenment. You know, this is, believe me, that is the situation today. And so the question is that we have become blind to certain things. We've become blind to the mystery of femininity. Now, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he covered his face. Read the Bible, and you're going to see all these mysteries are so clearly indicated. Why did he cover his face? Because he had spoken to God. And apparently there was such an overwhelming radiance that the Jewish people could not have put up with it. When Christ is present in the tabernacle is covered. And women wear veils, not because they're inferior, but because there is something sacred about the mystery of femininity. And this is something, you know, I'm not going, please don't leave this room in saying that I'm a feminist who considers that men are inferior, because, I mean, this is what they try to do, and of course unsuccessfully. I simply want to say there's absolutely no doubt that there is a deep connection between femininity and mystery. And this is best expressed in the Holy Virgin. You know, Mary is the incarnation of femininity. She is the true Eve. You know, the first Eve revolted. The second says, "I'm the handmaid of the Lord." Now, you see constantly, for example, that feminists, and according to Chesterton, you know, feminists are people who have a very strong dislike for femininity. You know, I believe he's perfectly right. You know, whatever is feminine is something that is not up to their taste. And this is why one of my great enemies, Simone de Beauvoir, wrote, "I hate babies." When a woman says that she hates babies, the sun sets. Because the glory of Mary, the glory of women, when Adam saw Eve, he says, "You are the mother of life." So therefore the link between the woman and life is a link established by God. And the very moment that women choose their child, the society is ruined. Now, please, I don't forget the tragedy in which many young girls find themselves. And I don't absolve men from a serious culpability. But I simply say the very moment that she understood that the female womb is the cradle of life, and that Christ declared himself to be life himself, don't you understand? The crime against life is a direct crime against God. Now, what is the attitude of Mary? First of all, she says, "How can this be? I know not man." And then she says, "I'm the handmaid of the Lord." Now, today, modern man, inebriated by his fantastic, overwhelming, technical discoveries. I mean, look, the life today is so radically different from the life when I was a child. When up to the time I was a teenager, the telephone rang about once a month, and then everybody knew that a disaster had taken place. And now, I mean, you can't take a walk and every people are spending their lives, you know. I don't know. At any rate, you're constantly on the phone, and then you had no television, and then the radio wasn't functioning properly. And today, now, we can fly to the moon. We are drunk because of our discoveries. And I can only tell you these discoveries are so remarkable that now man is capable of destroying the universe. We're capable of it. And it might very well be. You only need this one madman who just wants to have fun seeing the whole world blowing up. You see, now, let me tell you something which is a conclusion of my study of metaphysics. Man cannot create, but he can destroy. When a husband embraces his wife, he contributes his semen, which is a gift of God. She contributes her egg, which is a gift of God. But they cannot guarantee that they will join. This is something that God decides. I know people, I mean, my sister-in-law had to wait 14 years before she expected a baby. You know, now today we discover we cannot guarantee procreation, even if we do it in a dish, but we can destroy it. We can prevent it from coming into being, and this is, of course, a pill, and this is all the inventions that we have made. We cannot create the world. We can destroy it. Now, I say the situation is serious, because unless we wake up, there's absolutely no doubt about the fact that we are heading for disaster. We are living apocalyptic signs. Now, let me turn to Mary, because I claim that in her, we're going to find a solution. The most all-beautiful of all creatures, placed above angels. And if you realize that throughout the history of philosophy, material things were lower than spiritual things. But all of a sudden you find out that this young virgin, Jewish virgin, is above angels. The whole reversal of the metaphysical situation. She has a body like every single woman, and she's above angels. She's the queen of angels. And more than that, you see, one of the great gifts that my husband has given me is the discovery of the liturgy. And if you read the liturgy day after day, you find the most amazing things said about the Holy Virgin. Let me share some of them with you before I'm afraid that I'm running out of time. It's always what happens when I talk about something that I have a lot to speak about. It is said in the literature, I believe it comes from St. Bernard, that the devil fears Mary more than he fears God. And you read this and you say, well, you know, that doesn't make much sense. I mean, how can you fear a woman more than you fear God? And I believe it's St. Bernard, he says, because the one thing that the devil fears most is humiliation. And to be defeated by a woman to boot, crushing, I mean her foot, crushing his head, is a defeat which is so bitter to him that he dreads her. He fears Mary. There is another thing which is absolutely Mary, I'm quoting, it's not my invention. Mary refutes all heresies. No, she was not a doctorate. She didn't go to university. She didn't have a PhD. She never received a doctor honoris causa. She never wrote books and the rest of it. A humble virgin who had the amazing privilege of changing the diapers of the God-man. And I claim that angels envied her. Why is she called someone who refutes all heresies? St. Augustine refuted Manichaeism and Donatism and Pelagianism. 3 of them. He's done very well. She refutes all of them. Why? For the very plain reason that for 9 months she was inhabited, her womb was inhabited by the second person of whole Trinity, who said not only I am the life, but he said I am the truth. In other words, her whole body was so impregnated by the fact of a closeness to Christ, who is the truth, that obviously her very being refutes all and everything. I would like to end by sort of saying that Mary is the mother par excellence. Mary is the one who explained to us through a being why women cannot become priests. You know, this is one of these impertinent questions raised today. Say, why can't women become priests? I mean, after all, women are more intuitive than men, and women have many qualities that men haven't got. I feel that I have a right to become a priest. And if you become a priest, you might become a bishop, and who knows, you might become pope. Well, that's very tempting indeed. Why doesn't it make sense? Why is it a sheer arrogance, metaphysical impertinence? And I'm going to give an argument which I use in my new book, which is going to be published at Christmas time. Maternity and the priesthood are incompatible. They cannot be joined. Very much as no man can give birth. None of you. You can be geniuses, you can be what you please, but you're incapable of giving birth. A woman cannot be a priest. And I'm going to defend it by saying that if a priest understood what priesthood is, it is to be a second Christ. And to be a second Christ is to carry the cross out of love. When Don Bosco became a priest, after innumerable difficulties because of his poverty, his Holy Mother said, Giovanni, Giovanni, don't forget that to become a priest is to accept to suffer for others. Now, those of you who are mothers know that to be a mother means to suffer. I don't speak only of the problems of pregnancy. I don't speak of the excruciating pains of childbirth, always mentioned in the Old Testament as a sign of agony. But I claim that a mother remains a mother for the rest of her life. She always trembles about the welfare of her child. She fears that he might fall into sin. She keeps saying, I mean, maternity is something that does not end. You're a mother forever. Now, in my book, I call the priesthood and maternity two bejeweled crosses that are too heavy to be carried simultaneously. This is why women cannot become priests. Thank you. Please give some credit to my husband.
Before we have questions, Anthony wants to say a word about book signing.
No, Dr. von Hildebrand was be happy to sign books, but she can't immediately after the talk. So if anyone that would like a book signed could come to me sometime throughout the day, I can make sure that happens.
I will point the microphone first.
Thank you for your talk. I've been studying a philosopher by the name of Leonardo Polo for about 10 years. He's a professor at the University of Navarre in Spain. And his anthropology is kind of unique in the sense that he, basing himself on the real distinction between the act of being and essence, he says that an individual is a person with respect to their act of being, along the lines of what St. Paul would say, body, soul, and spirit. He would say that the act of being is the person, that the essence is the soul, and that the body is the body, the human nature. That's one thing that he says, and if you could comment on that, I'd appreciate it. The second thing he says, which I think is fascinating, and I've been wondering about it for years, he says that a woman is closer to her nature than a man.
Well, I wish you had explained it in greater details.
I'm sorry?
To make such a statement calls for an explanation. I wish he had given it.
Yes, that's good. Good question. I guess I have to read more.
You know, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what he said.
You don't have to read more.
I want more. Well, maybe we'll talk later.
Thank you very much for your talk. I am from the Hungarian Catholic University. Thank you very much for your wise.
I can't hear you.
Thank you very much for your wise words.
They don't come from me.
Okay. But anyway, thank you for mediating these words at least. Now, this is certainly something mysterious that we have this polarity in the universe, like positive and negative, in terms of physics, on the one hand, and we have a similar polarity in our human world, in terms of what you described with beautiful words, I would say. Especially in Orthodox theology, perhaps Trist can speak about longer than me, we find very interesting allusion to the feminine side of God, the maternal side of God. Not necessarily, not prima facie in the person of the Virgin Mary, but in divine wisdom. So it seems that there are tendencies, there are authors, theologians and philosophers, especially in the Orthodox tradition, who point out that femininity belongs to God Himself in an intrinsic way and in a certain sense. What do you think of that?
The femininity is part of, God has a feminine aspect, and the femininity belongs to God in a special way.
Well, I mean, you know, God being God has every possible perfection, but I mean, let us say on a divine level. You know, I personally don't like, look, not being a theologian, I feel that there are mysteries, and I believe probably this is typical of women. that I don't want to penetrate into. I just know that it's infinitely beautiful and infinitely perfect, and therefore whatever perfection is to be found in him. But I mean, to call God feminine is something which is a bit foreign to me, very much as I would not call him essentially. You know, he's transcending. I mean, I see God as so absolutely transcendent. And of course, theologians always go into all these phenomena, but I mean, I can only tell you I'm not a theologian.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for your talk. There are very few times when I hear someone speak and my heart burns because of the truth, and I'd really like to thank you for that. When you were mentioning the idea of the veiling of women and the mystery that is implied, I was wondering if you might talk more about how that might connect with Corinthians and the idea of women covering their head and having long hair because of the glory, and especially because I've heard it said that it seems to imply in that passage that women aren't necessarily made in the image of God in the way man is, and I was wondering if you might have anything to say about that.
You know, I truly have difficulties hearing because of my age. So could you just...
The passage of
First Corinthians?
1 Corinthians.
Yes.
That women cover their hair.
Sometimes it's implied that that passage means that women aren't made in the image of God in the way man is made in the image of God. And I was wondering how you might connect that with your idea of women veiling mystery.
You know, I do believe that a woman's relationship to a body differs very much from a man's relationship to a body, because, I mean, she should be conscious of a mystery, which is not to be found in man in the same fashion. I mean, this is why I personally believe that fashions today are absolutely shameful and are destructive of femininity. And I can only tell you something, that many, many women complain that they are harassed by men, and write me these letters, pathetic letters, that they are harassed. And then I ran back and I say, how do you dress? I never get an answer.
Yes, I was very intrigued. I'm from Germany, a confused philosopher.
I'm not.
And I was grateful for you protecting God against mistaken theology of Sophia, which is never recognized by the Orthodox Church. But now to your talk. You connected body, soul to man, woman in a very interesting way, and I want to comment on that. You understand me? You understand what I say?
Well, I'd like to, what do you want me to comment on?
It's coming.
I see.
The sin
is a virtue.
The sin you explained as the revolt of the body against the soul.
One aspect of it, but the main thing is a revolt of man against God.
Right.
That is number one.
That
and
is,
the punishment is that the body revolts against the soul.
Okay, because pride and all the wrong intellectual passions belong also to what Paul calls the life of the flesh. Now, this is important for our understanding of the relation between man and woman. The veil women wear, and this comes back to 1 Corinthians, they wear as a sign of submission to the authority of man. Women were created as helpers of man, and Paul makes a point that woman was created for man. So there is a difference in authority, which is essential to keep in mind. If we remember that the basic foundation of the fall is human pride, it seems to me that to understand women as the mystery is very dangerous to protect us women against the temptation of pride. We are privileged to be put under the authority of man because it is a better ascesis to Eve's first sin of pride, of wanting to know good and evil independently of God.
I personally consider that being a creature, it's a privilege to obey to people who have real authority. And I don't think it is difficult for a wise woman to obey her husband when he obeys God. The difficulty arises when the husband is unfaithful to God, and that can create tremendous problems in marriage. But I mean, to submit oneself to obey is the arch position of a creature. Now, go back to Plato and find this amazing thing that, you take an election year in the United States, which is always a pathetic year. Everybody running. You say you run for office. Now, according to Plato, this is something that he says very explicitly. Suppose that you have talents for being in authority, because you have an intellectual formation, because you seek the good, because you seek justice. You don't pursue it, and you accept it reluctantly, because it is dangerous to be in power. As Sim claimed, it's a blessing to obey. And you read Saint Therese of Lisieux when she says in the autobiography, what a blessing to be under obedience, because if you obey a legitimate authority, you cannot go wrong. So, I mean, instead of wishing to be in power, let us try to be good servants. I'm the handmaid of the Lord, be it done to me. These are the last words that I'd like to speak.
Thank you very much for your talk. My question has to do with women in the church, and I understand the arguments against women in the priesthood. There's still, most of the women that are angry about women not being priests are angry that women aren't visible parts of the church. So what other ways, which is, I think, is a very legitimate thing to be angry about, that there aren't visible women in the church in terms of influencing, and maybe other people disagree, and maybe you disagree, but how can we have women visible in the church in other ways? That's my question. Thank you.
I believe to be in the background, as women clearly are in the church, is to be in the supernatural foreground. This is the amazing thing about the supernatural. There is natural foreground when you make a lot of noise, and there is a supernatural. You take, for example, recently, I was in New Hampshire, and I read the life of a priest who had an amazing career, and he was basically very mediocre. And at one particular point, he became a very ardent priest. And he understood that there was a very holy soul praying for him. And he was extremely anxious to get to know her. And one day, had a sort of vision of what she looked like. And one day went to a convent, and he said, I'd like to see all the nuns. And he looked at all the faces and couldn't recognize her. And he says, well, is there no one else? He says, well, there's a very humble sister, she's working, doing very needed work in, cleaning up or something of the sort. I said, I would like to see her. And he recognized that she was the one who had obtained through her prayer and sacrifice that he had received this grace. Now, this is something we're going to discover in heaven. To be in the background is to be in the foreground. And this is the tsunami which is going to take place on the other side. To be in the foreground is dangerous for all of us, men and women. And, particularly because for women, because they're called to be veiled. And that is part of the mystery.
First, a response about the Orthodox view of Sophia. Today is the feast of St. Justinian the Great, who built the Hagia Sophia. Sophia is a Greek word which has a feminine gender, and it's known that the holy wisdom is Christ, surely no woman, and though a father can mother his children. I think it's the strongest reason why a woman can't become a priest is not that she's a mother, but like St. Paul said, and you just said to her, there's an order of authority. And St. Paul is very clear, the authority is carried by the icon of the second Adam, who is a man. And that's not a metaphysical issue, it's a liturgical issue, which is then expressed in metaphysical truth.
You want to respond to that? What? You want to respond to that?
I don't know what to say.
He said that the reason women can't be priests is rather than what you said is because they are St. Paul puts them under authority, and there is a hierarchy of authority, which is the reason for not allowing women into the priesthood.
I mean, the liturgy is the final restoration and order, because there the priest, as the second Adam, finally, because of the submission of the second Eve, offers everything to Christ.
You know, basically my remark should be seen against the background of my belief that when the church speaks, the matter is over. Roma locuta est, causa finita est. The church declares that women are not made for the priesthood. That's enough. But as a practicing Roman Catholic, I'm entitled to meditate on this and to find out additional reasons why God's decision is. But obviously, even if it doesn't make any sense to me, I will obey the church speaks, and that's all there is to it. But I mean, one thing is certain. The day that men can give birth, I will fight for the priesthood of women.
Thank you very much. And I know that many have answered the question I'm going to ask, but I was just curious to see what your response would be. You spoke about the complementarity between men and women and each one needing the other for completion. And I was wondering what your thoughts then on celibate vocations.
Beautiful question. In my experience, a priest cannot truly be a holy priest if he doesn't have a special relationship to the Holy Virgin. And I've met some very holy priests in my life, and all of them have a tender devotion to Mary. And I mean, the most perfect example is St. Bernard. I mean, what he has written about the Holy Virgin is absolutely matchless in the history of the Church. You're totally right, because if the feminine element is lacking, you know, men become over-intellectual. You know, the tragedy of fallen nature is that men become all mind and no heart. And when the mind is not fecundated by the heart, the mind goes off track, and many of them do. I mean, as I said, just read, you know, philosophy, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century. My goodness, the number of stupidities that these very great geniuses have produced is impressive. But I mean, there's no heart. There's absolutely no affective life. And I mean, don't forget that Christ said, you know, it is said in the Bible, give me your heart. Suppose I fall in love with someone, I said, I give you my intelligence. My goodness, I don't think he'd be impressed.
I think, what?
I'm just tired.
Okay. I think we'll have to call it off at this point. Well, thank you very much.